While the world was mourning the legendary David Bowie, his only daughter was 2,000 miles away, trapped in a remote Utah desert. She wasn't allowed to say goodbye, she wasn't allowed to leave, and she was fighting a battle for survival that her famous father would never see. This is the truth behind Lexi Jones's 13-month disappearance. To understand how the daughter of a global icon ended up in a locked facility in the middle of nowhere, we have to look past the velvet ropes of celebrity. For decades, David Bowie was more than a musician. He was an enigma, a shapeshifter who defined generations of culture. When he married supermodel Amian, they became royalty. But when their daughter, Alexandria Zahra Jones, affectionately known as Lexi, was born in the year 2000, they made a pact to shield her from the toxic glare of the spotlight. Eamon rejected every modeling offer that came Lexi's way, wanting her to have a normal childhood. But normal is a relative term when your father is David Bowie. Growing up in the shadow of giants creates a heavy, unseen pressure. You start to question every friendship, every kind word. Is this person sitting next to you because they like who you are, or because they want to get closer to your father's legacy? For Lexi, this constant hypervigilance bred a deep, quiet isolation. The spotlight didn't feel like warmth. It felt like exposure, like being entirely visible to the world without ever actually being known. By the time Lexi was 10 years old, the internal pressure began to manifest as severe mental health struggles. She suffered her first major panic attack at 10. By 11, she was self-harming, searching for any physical pain to match the emotional chaos inside her. By 12, she had developed bulimia. It was a silent, agonizing downward spiral that her family desperately tried to manage with traditional therapy. But the real breaking point came in 2014, when David Bowie was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. The family kept the diagnosis a closely guarded secret, but the weight of her father's impending death pushed Lexi over the edge. She turned to drugs and alcohol, not to party, but to escape. While other teenagers her age were experimenting for fun, Lexi was getting high and drinking completely alone in her room, desperate to numb the terrifying reality of losing her father. Her behavior escalated. She lashed out, her anger masking a profound, paralyzing fear. Her parents, terrified for their daughter's life while simultaneously dealing with a devastating terminal cancer diagnosis, felt completely out of options. In their desperation, they turned to a highly marketed, deeply controversial solution: the troubled teen industry. The intervention happened on a weekday morning. Lexi woke up to find two men, both over 6 feet tall, standing inside her bedroom. Her parents and her godmother stood nearby, tears streaming down their faces. Before they took her, her father read her a letter, the final line of which would burn into her memory forever. "I am sorry we have to do this." The men told Lexi she could do this the easy way or the hard way. She chose the hard way. Clinging desperately to a table leg, screaming bloody murder, she was physically pried away from everything she knew. They looped a rope around her, dragged her out of the house, and shoved her into the back of a black SUV. By the time the heavy doors slammed shut, her parents were already gone. This practice, known in the industry as youth transport, is a terrifying legal abduction, paid for by parents who believe it is the only way to save their children. But here is the ultimate tragic irony of this entire ordeal. While Lexi was about to be subjected to the most brutal, dehumanizing conditions imaginable, her father's liver cancer was rapidly reaching its terminal stage back in New York. The clock was ticking, and she had no idea. How could one of the most powerful, wealthy, and loving couples in the world be convinced that sending their vulnerable, self-harming daughter to a brutal wilderness camp, completely cutting off her communication during her father's final months of life, was the right decision? The answer lies in the predatory mechanics of the billion-dollar troubled teen industry. These programs prey directly on wealthy, desperate parents. When a child is self-harming and abusing drugs, parents feel a level of terror that clouds all rational judgment. Sales representatives for these facilities use high-pressure tactics, convincing parents that if they do not send their child away immediately, the child will end up dead or in prison. They convince parents that a clean break with zero communication is medically necessary for the therapy to work. Lexi was transported directly to a wilderness therapy camp, a grueling 91-day program designed to break a child's spirit under the guise of therapeutic healing. The reality of these camps is far from a peaceful nature retreat. Upon arrival, she was strip-searched and stripped of every basic human comfort. The rules were absolute, and the environment was deliberately dehumanizing. Consider 3 shocking realities of her daily life in that camp. First, basic hygiene was non-existent. The teenagers were forced to dig holes in the dirt to use as bathrooms. Second, the labor was relentless. They were forced to hike miles under the scorching sun, carry heavy packs, and master survival skills like building bonfires and pitching tarp tents in freezing conditions just to earn their meals. Third, their communication was completely controlled. They were only allowed to write heavily monitored letters, and the staff determined exactly who they could contact. Lexi recalled that some of the adult staff members had absolutely no interest in her as a human being. They only cared about her proximity to fame. They watched her sleep, controlled her movements, and left her feeling completely stripped of her humanity. After 91 days in the wilderness, Lexi wasn't allowed to go home. Instead, she was sent to a residential treatment center in Utah, where she would spend the next 13 months. The psychological control in these facilities is intense. For example, after Lexi kissed a girl in the house, she was placed on a strict no-speak status. For 2 weeks, she was forbidden from speaking to any other teenager in the facility, forced into a state of social exile designed to punish and shame her. And then, the nightmare reached its peak. On January 8, 2016, Lexi was allowed a rare phone call. It was her father's birthday. She told him she loved him, he said it back, and in her heart, she knew it was their final conversation. 2 days later, on January 10th, David Bowie passed away. Lexi was stuck inside the Utah facility when she heard the news. Soon after, she saw media reports claiming that Bowie had died peacefully, surrounded by his entire family. Reading those words made her physically ill. The whole family was there, except for her. She was trapped 2,000 miles away in a locked behavioral institution, mourning the loss of a global icon who was, to her, simply her dad. To understand how these facilities operate with such impunity, we have to look at the systemic structure of the troubled teen industry. This industry didn't appear overnight. Its roots trace back to the 1960s and 70s, heavily influenced by a cult called Synanon. Synanon utilized attack therapy and extreme sleep deprivation to break down a person's defense mechanisms. Over the decades, these cult-like tactics were repackaged as tough love and sold to desperate parents. Utah became the absolute epicenter of this industry. Why? Because the state's regulatory laws were incredibly lax, allowing private, for-profit corporations to build massive networks of residential facilities with minimal government oversight. For decades, these programs operated in the dark. But today, a massive reckoning is taking place. Survivors are step-by-step exposing the mechanics of these facilities. If you or someone you know is looking for ways to support this movement, the actionable steps are clear. First, advocacy groups like Breaking Code Silence are pushing for federal legislation to establish a national Bill of Rights for youth in residential placement. This would mandate strict government oversight, eliminate the use of physical restraints, and guarantee a child's right to contact their family. Second, survivors are utilizing public disclosure, sharing their stories on social media to dry up the pipeline of private funding that keeps these abusive facilities profitable. By exposing the truth, they are forcing insurance companies and school districts to stop funding these programs. The scale of this systemic abuse is staggering. Lexi Jones is far from the only high-profile survivor to speak out. Paris Hilton brought international attention to the industry when she exposed the horrific physical and emotional abuse she suffered at the Provo Canyon School in Utah during the late 1990s. Hilton testified before the Utah Senate, describing being woke up in the middle of the night by male staff members, being forced into solitary confinement, and being subjected to forced medication. Another shocking case study involves Havenwood Academy, a treatment center in Cedar City, Utah. In 2018, a 17-year-old girl who tried to run away was zip-tied by her wrists and forced to sit in a dirty horse trough full of water for 20 minutes as a therapeutic punishment. When local sheriff's deputies arrived, they found the girl shivering, her skin cold to the touch, and her wrists heavily marked by the restraints. Despite the police report, state regulators chose not to issue any severe sanctions against the program. This is the reality of the system, that thousands of children are sent to every single year, a system where abuse is rebranded as therapy. Lexi Jones survived for 13 months in Utah, eventually being released just before her 16th birthday. While she fell back into old, destructive patterns and was sent away again, she has spent years healing and reclaiming her voice. Today, she is a talented artist and musician, using her platform to speak out about her experience. Crucially, Lexi's clarified that she does not blame her parents. She loves them and understands that they were desperately trying to save a child they didn't know how to help. Her anger is directed not at her mother and father, but at a predatory, multi-billion-dollar industry that tears families apart at their most vulnerable moments. But the dark history of how these institutions came to power is even more unsettling than you think. To truly understand how a literal cult from California managed to shape the modern American teen treatment system, you need to understand the rise and fall of Synanon. Click on the video on your screen right now to dive deep into the terrifying history of the cult that spawned the tough love industry, and see how their brainwashing techniques are still being used on children today.